Right. I think we have a lot of participants who've joined us. All right. Thank you, everyone, and good evening. Thank you for joining Women in Energy's fourth webinar on the impact of COVID on Pakistan's electricity distribution sector and way forward. Can I please request everyone to mute themselves? So just to give you a brief intro about Women in Energy is a professional network to support women working in the energy sector in Pakistan. I am Seher Abbas Haider, and I am the co-chair for Karachi Hub of Women in Energy Pakistan. And I'm currently an energy consultant working with IFC on their resource efficiency program. So before we move forward, I have some housekeeping rules that I want to request everyone to comply with. First of all, I would really appreciate that all the attendees, all the participants, apart from the panelists, please keep your videos off and make sure that you're on mute at all times so that we can have an engaging discussion and there's no background noise. You will ask questions, but through the chat panel. You can keep writing your questions throughout the session, and I will ask questions on your behalf at the end of the discussion. We will speak in English as our audience and panelists come from different backgrounds. So it'll be good to include everyone. And please, I request therefore all the panelists that we stay to strictly English when we're discussing everything. So before we move on, COVID basically has taken the entire world by a storm. And countries around the world have actually have done some level of lockdown, partial or complete, to curb the spread of the virus. A lot of industries globally have been shut down, retail, shops, malls, and apart from some very few essential businesses. Energy now basically is the foundation. Power is the foundation of our modern life. And power sector has not been, when you say like industries like tourism or other retail industry have been impacted severely as they've been shut down completely, power is still up and running as it's essential. However, the power distribution sector has faced other challenges such as the reduction in demand and other challenges in financial performance. So before I introduce my panelists, I will quickly tell you about the structure of our panel. We have divided the discussion into three parts. The first part will talk specifically on the impact of COVID on the financial performance of the distribution sector. The second part will talk about the regulatory responses that different countries around the world and Pakistan have have provided with to try to address this challenge. And the third part would be going ahead, way forward. How can we bounce back from this challenge, and what are the steps that can be taken going forward? So without wasting more time, I'm going to start the first section and introduce my first panelist. We have Zubair Mahmood with us, who is currently working as team lead of Policy, Governance and Corporate Planning section of CPPAG. He has diversified experience of around 15 years in the field of accounting, finance, audit, ERP management, and business planning in various sectors. He has 10 years of rich experience across the value chain of the power sector. He's worked in Pakistan for international organizations ranging from ADB, US8 to PwC before joining CPPA. Our second panelist in this section is Mehreen Aziz Khan, who is currently the Chief Marketing and Communication Officer at K-Electric. Mehreen Aziz Khan has over 19 years of experience in strategic communications, media, and public policy. Ms. Khan has previously held key positions in a variety of public and private entities, including the United Nations and the World Bank. Ms. Khan read law at Cambridge University and then qualified as a... She has a master's in public policy from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and with specialization in strategic management of organizations, political advocacy, and Can I please request Mr. Zubair Mahmood to kickstart the discussion and tell us about the impact of COVID on the financial performance of the distribution sector. Zubair, over to you.
Thank you very much, Seher, for giving me opportunity to provide some kind of information related to this topic. So, first of all, I would like to just uh, give something to perspective about the power sector, that how the sector is working, and I would like that audience should look into this first slide, which is the I have given to you. You can just share that, so that I want the audience to be very focused that how the COVID is going to have impact on the next one, like second slide. Okay, so this is very important slide where, like, just before we go to how it is going to affect, we have to just know that what was the situation just before the COVID hit the country or the overall globe. So we have like 6 different segment in the distribution business, like which are our customer, which from which we make profits, or to which we supplies our services, the electricity services. So I have highlighted, the yellow highlighted are the loss making categories, like the domestic and agriculture. You can see there are few like domestic categories which are profitable, but on overall average it is like loss making segment. And then you go to the right, the green part, there you can see the 4 different segments which are the profit making segments. Now just imagine that which areas the COVID has impact. So every person can think about that, for the energy purposes, for the power consumption purposes, all the businesses are shut. So when the businesses are shut, so mainly the industrial activity and the industrial and bulk part, that is the portion which is going to have impact. And the secondly, when the markets are closed, everyone know that market is closed, things are, so then the commercial part of this business is going to have reduced. So this is the area which was the profitable part of the distribution business. It is going to be squeezed due to the COVID implication. And which is going to expand, that is the loss making categories, which we have. The one is the domestic, because if people are not going to work, that all the load is going to shift toward the domestic, because people sitting in their houses, working from home, everything else. So this is the part which is going to have increase. So here the loss making, so this is not only on the power sector, it's not only have impact that it is going to have financial implication. On one side it is squeezing the profitable categories, on the other side it is enhancing the loss making. So it is a both side. The power sector is very much in a tight position with respect to its financial performance. So from this slide, it was the 2 categories was supposed to make loss of 450 billion at the bottom of the red line, and the profit making, it was estimated that it will give 250 billion of profit, and there will be net position of 200 billion for the Pakistan perspective, which is going to be through subsidy or other areas government was supposed to provide. But now the situation has changed. So I have just made one analysis that only change in the consumer mix, how it is going to have impact. So if just 1% decrease in the profitable categories, and just minimal corresponding increase in the loss making category, just 1%, it is going to have 6 billion rupees impact on the overall power sector, power distribution sector of the country. So now there are the come to the different variations, that this sensitivity I have prepared so that audience know that 1% impact is going to translate approximately 6 billion rupees for the whole sector. So now what we have actually seen for the last 2 to 3 months, so how the COVID has impact on our demand. So Seher, can you go to the next slide? So here is the slide. uh, uh, I didn't put the percentages, I forgot that, but actually from starting from March it was around 4%, then it's around 7 8% 10% reduction in demand. In May it is very minuscule, maybe due to Ramadan or other timing. So on average it's approximately 6 to 7% demand reduction in these last 3 months. So if 7% multiply by 6 billion, so it's approximately 40 billion impact we are going to have on the power sector just due to the change in mix. So one thing keep in mind that when it is a regulated business, the power distribution companies cannot respond as quickly when it is a deregulated business, because all the cost, all the things has to go through a proper channel, a proper regulatory process, and the other government notification process has to be followed before any rate changes. So the rates are fixed not considering the COVID situation, but we are facing the COVID situation, so impact are very negative, and it is going to uh, maybe prolong for a longer period of time as compared to any other business which can respond through its own pricing methods or other things. So this is the basic point, that everything, the in these sectors, especially the profit making categories, if they are going to be squeezed, the power sector have. So this is the one part I have completed. So now I would like to take to the second part of this presentation. So the second part is, I have categorized the impact of COVID in two areas. One is related to the performance of distribution business, and the other is non-performance factor, non-operational factor, which are strategic decisions, like when the government intends to provide some kind of facilitation to the consumers, that they intend not to increase the prices, they want to have installment business, installment, they want to waive on their bills. So these are the things which, until the time the financial gap is bridged by the government of Pakistan through appropriate injection at time, otherwise it is going to have financial crunch for the power sector, and power sector may not be able to meet its obligation towards the IPPs, and eventually maybe the power, uh, uh, I would like to call it as a uh, financial constraint for the delivery of services to the consumer, that if the distribution companies don't have money to pay to the generators, then it is going to shed the load to, for its consumer. So these are the financial, I say it's as the financial constraints. Other are the like technical constraints or the capacity constraints, but it is the financial constraint due to which the power distribution companies may not be able to provide the services to their consumer. So now this slide is the non-operational factors. Slide number 6, Sahar, please can you, the next one, the next, this one, this. So these are the non-operational factors, like these are already decisions made by the government. So there are, so COVID is going to have impact because the number of units, the fixed cost recovery is on the estimation of around 100 billion units, but actually it's going to be maybe 97 billion units or 90 billion units. So there will be a reduction in recovery of the fixed cost, but at the same time there will be increase in the figure, because there was a project which were in the pipeline prior to this COVID situation, where the growth rate estimation was like 5%, 6%, 7%, and accordingly the capacity addition was coming in line on the system. So this cost is going to hit into the financial position of the distribution companies. But the government, on the other hand, has put the stoppage to increase the prices. So the influx is there, but the outflux is not there. So we are not like, the cost is accruing to the distribution companies, but it is not being passed on to the consumer. So this is another thing which is going to cause the problem. And the change in consumption mix, as I have already explained, and there will also be like subsidy change gap when the consumption mix is changed. So there will be already consumption mix change, there subsidy will also be changed. And the 5 and 6 are already like government don't want to increase the tariff. So the adverse impact of dollar, adverse impact of other costs, that is not going to be passed on to the consumer. And the last one is the seventh increase in the supplementary charges. Like if the power distribution company don't meet its obligation towards the power generators are going to charge them for the markup or other things, and the late payment charges, and the distribution companies will be obligated under their contracts to deal with that and to provide, and it may inflate the prices in the longer run. And the next one is specifically related to the operational factor. Sir, can you please do the next slide? So this is the reduction in losses, increase in losses, reduction. So like when there is a consumer mix is changed, the losses will be increased. Like the industrial consumer, they are at a very low high level voltage, they are connected very low level of losses. But when their sales at that level is decreased, the sale at lower level increase. So in a percentage, the losses are increased. In any way it will be increased. If the good consumer are lost, the percentage of losses will increase. And the same goes for the recoveries, that if the good consumers do not buy, or demand is reduced for the good consumer, and we treat that the commercial and the industrial and the bulk and other consumers, the good consumer as compared to the domestic consumers recovery ratio, so that is going to percentage of recoveries that will be shattered, that will be problematic for the distribution company. And number third is the installment, implication of installments. Like if the government, uh, we have to bill uh, for the month for 60 billion or 70 billion, and out of which we will be able to recover only 30 billion or 40 billion, there will be a financial gap of 20 to 30 billion or each month. And that financial gap has to be bridged by some swap financing or other bridge financing mode by the company or the government. If it is not, then the same, it will have impact of other supplementary charges. And the fourth one last is like the recoveries from the defaulters. Like the government was pursuing very hardly for the defaulters and other, but due to economic slowdown and COVID, so these are the areas where it is expected that recoveries will be decreased. So in overall, just to uh, provide some figures, I would like to say that losses has not much impact. Losses will be like ranging from 5 to 20 billion rupees per annum uh, due to change in variation in the increase change in the consumption mix. Like uh, it is estimated that industry will be sliced down by 30%, and which is actually around 23-24% in the last 1 or 2 months. It is down. The commercial is already down by 20%, but the trend, how long it will continue, that will depend that how much time it take for the recovery. So due to these, the law, and on the corresponding side, the domestic and agriculture increase in the number of units and sales, that has causing the increase in losses. So losses will be ranging from 5 to 20 billion per annum, and the recoveries will be having impact of around 40 to 70 billion per annum for the next 2 to 3 years, till the time that economy recover to the shape prior to the COVID situation. So I have consolidated overall the impact of these all these factors. So due to non-operational factors, due to the strategic decision of the governments, it is going to have 240 billion impact by the close of year 2020. And due to operational factors, the impact is going to be the 170 billion. which includes the installment part, where we will be having the lesser recoveries in the 2020 years. And then it goes on for the next 2 years. 2021, it is important to highlight here that for the year 2020, we just got hit for the last quarter, starting from March, April, May. So it are the 4 months which are going to have impact, adversely hit. Thus, previous 8 months were good, but these are the 4 months. But for the year 2020, when our exports order are no more, they are cancelled, the industry is not in a shape of reviving for the next 3 to 4 quarters. Same goes for the commercial activities, that even the commercial activity resumes, the change of consumption pattern, that is very questionable, that it is going to be resumed to the level prior to the consumption. So based on different consumption pattern and different studies, we have calculated this number, that for the year 2021 will be the adverse impact, and for the year 2022 we will be on a shape of revival and have some kind of uh, uh, again back to the situation for the towards the recovery. So this is what the overall assessment for the sector. And let's see how the government, regulator and the distribution companies can take this matter uh, further to handle this situation.
Thank you so much, Zubair. That was very important and interesting information, and it just highlighted the impact, the scale of the impact. Can I now move to Mehreen? And could I ask you to talk about the impact on K Electric as the only private utility in Pakistan? It'll be very interesting to hear your perspective on all the important indicators and how business has been significantly impacted.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much indeed, Seher, for your introduction and for allowing me to present right now. First of all, many thanks to Zubair Saab for such a comprehensive and well-researched presentation. He's actually done a lot of the job for me. He's covered a lot of the points that I was hoping to cover, so I'm just going to build upon the material he's so eloquently presented. So first of all, what I'll do is I'll start with the impact of COVID on the distribution sector, of course, concentrating on the experiences and the data we have at K Electric. So basically what we've noticed over the lockdown period from the 23rd of March till about the 15th of May, just before Eid, was that demand from our commercial segment reduced by 75%. The industrial segment decreased by 55%, and the residential segment increased by 25%, which was obviously because people were staying at home, and we were executing a zero load shed regime, even in the very high loss and high loss areas. And this was part of providing relief for Karachi's residents. We have a very strong ethos at K Electric that we are synonymous with this city and we stand by this city. And therefore, we wanted to make sure that we contributed to the success of the lockdown. In the first 6 weeks, it was a strict lockdown, and we wanted to make people comfortable at home and to ensure that they had uninterrupted power, even if they were living in VHL or HL areas. So with the gradual lifting of the lockdown, what we're expecting is that demand will pick up. However, I think it's pretty clear, and especially from Zubair Saab's presentation as well, that demand won't go back to what it was before. It will do so gradually. And with the onset of summer, we've already seen some of that kicking in because the temperatures are higher and people are slowly getting back to their industrial production and commercial activity. Now, what has been the financial impact on KE recoveries? So again, a lot of this reinforces what Zubair Saab has said. We're expecting potential losses from recoveries in the commercial residential segment of about 55 to 65%, and a significant dent in the industrial recoveries of about 80 to 90%. Now, what do we do about this? I think no one's going to argue that COVID has had and will have a very measurable and significant financial impact. But what we would like to say, and I think Zubair concluded on this, is that the regulator and the regulator in particular has a significant role to play, as we've seen, and I think you're going to go over in the next section in other countries, that the regulator is able to provide some support to the utilities. And in particular, of course, we need an adjustment in the tariff. So as Zubair's first slide pointed out, that's because the tariff is currently on a cost plus basis. Now, as he said so eloquently, the costs are out of the window now, because what's happened is those tariffs were based on different growth assumptions, much higher growth assumptions, and that's just not going to be realized. In fact, we're going in the other direction. And therefore, it's respectfully submitted that perhaps a working capital cost for this unusual impact on recoveries be allowed. Now, the other thing is that given the devastating impact that COVID is having, the regulator is going to obviously provide timely issuance of these tariff orders. That's going to be critical. They perhaps should reduce the processing time for the determination process and the decisions, because what the consumer demands and what the utilities will need to do is be very responsive to consumers. We're already seeing that consumers are reaching out for relief. So any of these tariff variations will need to be processed in the shortest possible time, because we need to minimize the impact on the cash flow of these utilities. And of course, the reason why we're having this particular webinar is because people can't live without utilities. This is not a segment of the economy that you can simply afford to have impacted negatively, because life is not possible without utility. It is a public good. And therefore, the government has to intervene in order to ensure that people have access to this vital service. Now, what about local relief measures? Let me talk a bit about what's happened here in Karachi and what K Electric was able to do, particularly during the lockdown. So we provided uninterrupted power to all parts of Karachi and the surrounding areas where our ambit in is, even those areas where there was 80% power theft. Now that's important because basically the national power policy allows us, as you know, to load shed in those areas, but we made a commitment to stand by the people of Karachi, and during this very challenging time, we decided that we would provide power even to those areas, and obviously that has a great impact on our cash flows. We also deferred payments, and again, Zubair alluded to this in terms of installments. We deferred payments to the economically vulnerable segments with bills of up to 4,000 rupees per month being deferred, and installment plans for customers with less than 300 units per month from March through to the May period. Those are in now equal monthly installments spread over the next 3 months. The ISPA arrears, now that's for industrial segments. And basically we were going to be able to recover that amount which had previously been given to industries. And because of COVID hitting in March, we've also deferred that for a month and offered installment plans to facilitate industrial entities because obviously they were impacted a great deal due to the lockdown. So let me just briefly touch upon the low power demand. Now, so on the one hand, and again, Zubair said this, you've got a lower demand amongst your good consumers, the people who pay on time and who most of your recoveries depend on, industries, commercial. And those very segments, your good consumers, are now reducing their rate of production, or sadly, some of the commercial entities are either in a strict lockdown, like restaurants or whatever, unable to open shopping malls, or sadly, some of them are going to go out of business, or they're going to come back with a reduced size of their operations after layoffs. So now you've got your good consumer who's going to have a lower demand, who you used to rely on for the majority of your recovery, and you're a not so good consumer, I don't want to call it a bad consumer, but a not so good consumer who traditionally you've had a tough time recovering from, who has now have a higher demand and probably an even lower recovery rate. So you've got a double whammy, essentially. And that is the real challenge here, because it's going to be a huge financial burden on the power utility, especially on our cash flows, which are already suffering due to the large receivables we have from the federal and provincial governments, and that's to the tune of, for K Electric, over 240 billion rupees to date. Now, what's the government done? Well, on its part, I think the government deserves credit, because they have subsidized the provision of prepaid electricity to certain industrial and commercial SMEs. I think that was a fantastic gesture and a very timely gesture. It was needed, it was targeted, and it's been very well received. However, we would like to point out and respectfully submit that the residential sector is suffering a great deal. Now, these are going to be the people who are going to lose their jobs. There's going to be increased unemployment. Some statistics and studies are predicting as much as 2 million unemployed in Karachi alone, and they will have a lower disposable income, and therefore they will be unable to pay their electricity bills. And again, the double whammy is that because they'll lose their jobs, they'll be at home, their electricity demands will go up, they'll have a higher bill and a lower income. So that's going to be an even larger gap. And what's happened with installments is, because they've been spread out over future months, what you're going to have is lower income in the future months when those bills come through, because eventually they have to come through even if you pay on installments. So that's a challenge that I think the government needs to look at, because those are going to be the ordinary people, the average folk who have lost their jobs and who don't have a safety net to fall back on. So I think those are all my points at the moment for this segment. Thank you very much. And I'll wait till the final segment to make some more points. Thank you, Sahar.
Thank you so much, Marine, for explaining the impact in such detail. And I think we've talked about the impact in a lot of detail, as Zubair and Marine were able to explain it nicely. So now moving on to the next section, which actually talks about how governments around the world have been responding to such crises, and how and what Pakistan's been doing, and how NEPRA can maybe Pakistan can learn from other countries. So I will quickly introduce our panelists for this section. We have Ms. Sadia Qayyum, who is an energy specialist at the World Bank and also a chair at Women in Energy. And our second panelist is Mr. Tawseef Farooqi, who is currently serving as chairman of NEPRA. Mr. Farooqi has over 27 years of techno-commercial experience with specialization of managing the commercial and business side of IPP projects. Mr. Farooqi is an electrical engineer from University of Engineering and Technology, Lahore, MBA from Lahore University of Management Sciences, and a graduate in executive program in management from Columbia Business School. So before we quickly move on to the responses, can I ask you, Sadia, to maybe briefly touch and discuss the gap, basically the increasing gap, which is briefly being touched by the last two panelists as well, on the cost of power supply and the amount that is actually billed, and how maybe given in the economic downtime and the economic difficulties Pakistan is facing, how can the government facilitate and help bridge that gap?
Thank you, Sahar. And before I start, I'd actually quickly like to thank Zubair Saab and Marine for giving such a comprehensive summary of the impact. And I would actually urge, if this data can be made available publicly, if it's available on CPPAG website or NEPRA's website, for transparency purpose. I mean, everybody understands that COVID has had a adverse financial impact. And coming to your questions here, so Zubair Saab has talked about it, Marine has talked about it. I mean, in Pakistan, of course, even before we had COVID, we had this widening gap between the increasing cost of service, which is around 19 rupees per kilowatt hour, whereas what we're billing to the consumers is 12, 13 rupees. If you just compare the tariff differential subsidy between FY18 and FY19, it increased by 132%, primarily because the power cost has increased, and a capacity payment component, which increased by 40% as rupee devalued. And this is something that Zubair Saab talked about. Now, little less than 1/3 of our sector revenues are actually coming from subsidies, which is an enormously high number. And if you look at the last 10 years, the estimated annual subsidy has been around 250 billion rupees, whereas because of the COVID impact, this year, it's estimated, according to our estimates, it's going to be around 400 billion. Now, where is that money going to come from? Because as Marine said, the consumers have lower lower capacity to be able to pay. They have been impacted adversely by this crisis, and this has been a debilitating crisis, not for just households, for industry as well. Now, traditionally, industrial consumers or your commercial consumers have been cross-subsidizing. I mean, their average rate is around 24, 25 rupees, whereas domestic sector, it's around 10 rupees. And our industrial tariff is already one of the highest in the region. And going forward, now, because of this, financial liquidity crunch that the discos are facing, the government either will have to put it on its own books, or it will have to pass on to the consumer. But it's going to be extremely difficult to pass on this higher cost to industrial consumers or to consumers who are already paying because of the adverse impact that the pandemic has had on them. But there is an opportunity within the tariff structure to actually create some fiscal space. Now, what needs to be done, and there are various analysis and reports that are available out there that shows that how our subsidies are actually distortive. And a recent analysis by the poverty team at the bank using the household energy survey data showed that the bottom quintile of the population was getting only 12% of the subsidy, whereas 80% households in the top quintile are getting a large chunk of the subsidy, which basically illustrates that even though the government's intention to provide the subsidy is, it comes from good heart, but it's really not benefiting the consumer should be benefiting. And this has been, talked about and debated for a very long time, but I think this is the opportunity and this is the responsibility of the government, the regulator, to be innovative in the way they structure the tariffs, because anybody who's consuming more than 100 units, and particularly if anybody's consuming more than 200 units, that means they have a refrigerator, an air conditioner. They can afford to pay the higher tariffs, and they shouldn't be given the subsidy. And similarly, in agriculture consumers, we see that there are people with farmers with medium-sized land holding that again have been given the subsidy, but can actually afford to pay the higher cost. So, going forward, we know that the base tariff hasn't been revised. Last it was notified in early 2019. This is the time that the tariff will be revised. I think the ministry should really look at innovative solutions, and you get examples from other countries on how they have targeted subsidies better. I think this needs to be done, because otherwise, and I see a lot of questions that are coming up on how the government is planning to bear this cost or this financial impact that COVID has had. And the government has had to raise 200 billion rupees through sukuk bonds, or there's 100 billion rupees through short-term financing facilities from commercial banks. This has an interest cost, even though the government keeps on rolling the debt, but somebody needs to pay the interest cost. And I think a financing cost surcharge is around 46, 47 pesos per kilowatt hour. Can't be increased further unless NEPRA Act is amended. And why do we need to take on further debt? I know this is a difficult situation, but even before COVID-19, we've had a circular debt of 1.8 trillion. So this is the time that we actually start thinking about how the government is giving subsidies, because you also want to stimulate economic demand by your productive sectors. When you're subsidizing domestic consumers, you basically do incentivizing consumption inefficiency.
Thank you, Sadia, for highlighting all the important points. Can I pose this question to Chairman Nepra? And can you briefly touch upon this gap, the increasing gap and the need for subsidy, and how can the government address it? And then maybe we can move on to talking about the responses. Tausif sir?
Thank you very much, sir, for giving me this opportunity. Let me clarify to my audience one thing. Whatever Sadia just proposed to basically, revise the base tariff and what Marine earlier suggested.
So we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Your voice is really low. It's difficult to understand what you're saying. Sorry, so we can still not hear you. Yeah, we can't hear you clearly. It's very low. Yeah, can you speak now?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
This is good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to clarify one point that Sadia just mentioned about rebasing the tariff, and Marine also talked about regulators' intervention. Both these actions will directly mean increasing the tariff. Which unfortunately, because on the one hand we are talking about COVID's very negative impact on the our distribution sector and the capacity of our people to pay, and especially Marine made a case, especially about the domestic consumers having a double jeopardy, losing their jobs as well as having staying at home. So under these circumstances, the last thing we can think about is increasing the electricity prices. Just yesterday, we were approached by all the discos to increase their quarterly adjustments, because as Sadia pointed out, we already have outstanding a couple of quarters, quarterly adjustments which were pending, and that only means increasing the price. So yesterday they came to us and requesting us to increase 162 billion rupees of which if we translate simply in rupee terms, it was around 1 rupee 62 paisas. But we refused that because Prime Minister and Cabinet has already announced that there will not be any price hike until 30th June. And I'm quite sure before 30th June, they are going to probably stretch it for a longer period. So generally, let me just also address this, that generally there are three ways of getting more revenue. One is to increase your sales. Unfortunately, considering the current circumstances, there is not much scope on that side, even though we have already approached the discos to explore the possibilities. Yesterday, we gave them some tips, especially the bigger customers. We asked them to approach them and have 1 point supply so that they have a surety of payments as well. The second thing is that we increase the tariff. And as I already mentioned, the last thing we will consider is to increase the tariff at this critical juncture, because that is going to be like breaking the back of our consumers, and I think that will be an injustice with them. And the third and the last way that we can increase the revenues is by getting subsidies. I can't speak on behalf of the government, but considering that they have recently given 12,000 rupees per person in the SARS program for 120 million people, that's already a huge. They have already given almost 1 trillion rupees of a package, one of the largest packages ever offered in Pakistan's history. I'm not sure if they have the capacity to be able to give more. I mean, Marine has already touched upon a few incentives they have already offered. One being the prepaid package to the SMEs, and then giving installments to the domestic consumers. So in addition to that, we are in discussions with the government, but at the end of the day, that is going to be government's decision. I can talk on behalf of naturally my authority, NAPRA. NAPRA is definitely not in a mood or in a position to be able to break the back of our consumers. So we are holding, and we will keep holding any increase in price for as long as we can. We are only hoping. I wanted to show you guys a slide, but let me just very quickly walk you through that. There are many factors which are affecting or having a negative impact on our distribution business. It's a negative spiral, and these are the factors which are giving impacting it. One being the GOP policy to defer recovery from residential consumers. It is definitely having a negative impact. The next one, reduced sales because of COVID is impacting both industrial and commercial load, as Zubair has already pointed out in his slides. The third being decrease in overall recovery percentage in terms of revenue, because selling electricity is one thing, and recovering the amount that has been sold out, that is altogether a different ball game. And our historical performance prior to COVID was that we were not recovering around 90% of that. And I have been told, I don't have the numbers with me, that in last couple of months, the recoveries have gone as low as even 40% in few distribution companies. And Zubair has also mentioned this, that since the number of units being sold, that has reduced the overall fixed charges, which are the capacity payments, which they are going to be spread on a lower number of units. So overall capacity charges or fixed charges will be increased. And next one being reduced distribution margin due to reduced sales and recoveries. And all these earlier 5 factors that I mentioned will have negative connotations on the tariffs, and is only going to put it under pressure. And that will either call for a higher tariff that NAPRA has to play its role, and or the second thing, which I already mentioned, is probably government subsidies, which again I'm not sure in what position government is to offer any more subsidies. The only positive thing, there are only 2 positive things that are coming out of this COVID. One is we are seeing reduction in the fuel cost. So unfortunately, there is a lead time of 1 or 2 months. That's why we have not yet passed on those benefits yet to the consumers. One reason for that is that we are not using a lot of RO or RFO. That's why the reduction in the furnace oil price is not having a direct impact as much as one would have expected. RFO is already linked with the RLNG price because it is linked with the Brent. So it will also have an impact on that. But again, since there's a lead time of 1 or 2 months, so hopefully starting from this month we are going to see the impact. But for the last 5 to 6 months, because government didn't want to increase the prices, CPPAG has not approached us for any fuel-related adjustments actually. So, but hopefully that is going to be positive on consumers. So that is like accumulating. So any negative impact because of the capacity charges, because of the rupee dollar parity, which is adjusted during in the quarterly adjustment, that I hope will be knocked off with a negative impact on the fuel charges. The second positive thing that Corona has brought us is the use of technology. I don't think under normal circumstances we would probably be using Zoom and sitting in me sitting in my office at 8:30, almost 8:30 at night, and giving this talk. So this has really given us new avenues, and lots of our public hearings and the meetings that we are having online. So that is something very, very positive. One very quick impact worldwide that I would like to share with you on the energy sector is that overall energy investments are down by almost 20%. I'm just quoting a BBC survey that I was reading, whereas fossil fuel investments are down by almost 30%, and RE investments are going to be impacted by 10 to 15%. This is for sure this year, but they are expecting that this trend is going to continue. The percentages might change. The investment in the shale fuel, that has already gone down by 50%. And they are also expecting a huge impact on the climate change, but the number has not yet been assessed. So this is the overall international impact. Few more things that we are seeing in our local distribution sector is there's a lot of impact on the workforce, the way workforce is operating. There are psychological impacts, there are physical impacts. So it is definitely having a serious challenge for the distribution companies. Like for the past 2-3 months, they could not be able to send out their billing guys or meter reading guys to go and do the meter readings, especially those areas where all that is done manually. So then many projects which are under execution, their schedules have been delayed, and a lot of companies are asking for the force majeure. And then workforce and supply chain restrictions are very much there. And then we are seeing some very serious execution in the new connections, which were previously handled by discos. So the pending connections are increasing with the discos of COVID. And last but not the least, we are seeing a lot of tighter budgetary pressures on all the discos, and the power demand on the other hand is going down, and the projections are not very healthy actually. So all this is going to definitely impact the capacity expansion plans. We have recently received the indicative generation capacity expansion plan by NTDC, and I think we are already receiving the comments from various stakeholders that we should ask them to actually revise them considering the corona impact. So these are the few things that I wanted to highlight, and I'm available if there are any specific questions. I'll be more than happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Chairman Saab, for this detailed explaining. And like you said, the government is in no position to increasing subsidies, given the economic downturn and the amount of relief they have to provide. But there is a need to come up with maybe some creative solutions, because obviously the power utilities are experiencing a huge rise in cost of service as well. So, and this discussion is very interesting, but we really are running short on time. So can I just quickly ask you, Sadia, very briefly, to touch on some of global examples of how countries around the world and regulators around the world are trying to address this challenge, and maybe we can use something, like maybe Pakistan can learn from different countries and come up with some creative solutions. So if you can like very briefly try to touch on this.
Yeah, I understand we're running out of time. So the response by various governments have been similar in terms of providing economic relief to their consumers. I mean, countries like Nigeria or Indonesia who can afford to pay, they've actually provided electricity for free for 2 months for all of the consumers. Whereas some countries, like Singapore, have resorted to reducing the electricity tariff or gas tariff for their households. We've also seen a country like Nepal who's actually reduced the industrial tariff by I think 10%, 15% to encourage more utilization of excess capacity that's available. They've also, countries like South Korea have deferred the electricity bill payment, staggered the bill payment over the next few months for households. And then we're seeing a lot of examples from India as well, where they've reduced the electricity tariff, frozen electricity tariff, that something like we saw in Pakistan as well. Now the government over here has decided to freeze the tariff until June 20, at the end of this month. It will be interesting when it actually revises the tariff, and how much of this cost is passed will be passed by the government, because again, where does the money come from? Because they are competing resources, competing priorities of the government, and they have a fiscal deficit. And in terms of regulators' response, as Chairman Saab said, we need to, where is the increased revenue is going to come from? So the utilities and the regulators together have come up with innovative solutions to encourage consumers to pay on time, those who can afford to pay. I think this will be applicable in Pakistan as well, because this flat relief has been given to consumers consuming up to 300 units, that they can stagger their bill payment. But those who can afford, they've been given a reduction, like in Delhi, a 1% discount or reduction in electricity tariff if they pay within the first week of bill being issued, and they've been and 0.5% if you pay in the second week. They also use of technology where the meter readers could not go and bill. The regulators have allowed the utilities to bill on a provisional basis, and I think that's being done in K Electric. I'm not sure, and Chairman Saab can confirm this being done by other utilities as well, because last time we talked to HESCO, they were having problems because the meter readers couldn't go and bill. Similarly, now people, first we had mobility restrictions, and we didn't have consumers who could go and pay the bills, and given the situation of the pandemic, it would be difficult, or people would be hesitant to go to the banks and pay. So then encouraging the consumers by some kind of discount as an incentive if they pay digitally through mobile money platforms or through online bank transfers. We've also seen countries where the regulator has relaxed some regulatory compliance requirements, like extending the deadline for submitting monthly or quarterly reports. There has been, of course, Marine was talking about this, that the regulator need to process the tariff in a timely manner. And Chairman Saab addressed this point, but I think the tariff has been frozen up till June 30th, but after that, the government will have to pass on, and we need to process, and I was part of the tariff hearing yesterday, and this was adjourned because there was no representative from CPPAG. Even though, yes, there was ECC decision that your tariff will be frozen until the end of this month, but I think it's still important that we're processing this, the tariff petitions. Similarly, I think it's time that the distribution companies also start submitting their yearly tariff petition for revision of base tariff. If the government decides to not increase the electricity tariff, they can put it on their books, but at least this process needs to start, because the time between when the discos submit the petition, when it's actually notified, is quite long. And when they submit this petition, they need to take into account the impact of COVID, they need to take into account the requirement for increased working capital requirement, which has been done by other regulators as well. India, for example, CERC, they have allowed or waived off the LPS that the utilities or the distribution companies have to pay to power generators. So it's gone, I think they reduced it from 18% to 12%. So these are some of the measures. And one thing that regulator can consider is maybe relaxation on some of the regulatory benchmarks. Right now, it's 100% recovery and losses of 15%. We understand that there is, of course, as a regulator, they need to make sure that the distribution companies are operating efficiently. But at the same time, we know that provinces in the south, in the north, they have their own political, socio-economic peculiarities, because of which it might be difficult to get 100% collection, and especially in these conditions. So maybe that is something that the regulator in Pakistan can also consider.
Yeah, can I respond? Yeah.
Sure, sir. If you can keep it a little brief, because we're really running short on time.
Yeah. Very quickly, we have taken a couple of measures to basically look for new customers, because not only we had a fairly good balance of demand and supply, but with the demand going lower, I think there's a very strong chance we'll have excess capacity in the country. So I attended a meeting today whereby we have already decided that there was a request from KE to put up set up a new power plant for 700 megawatts. So instead of allowing them to set up a new plant for 700 megawatts, since we are going to have enough electricity in the system, we are going to provide them the 700 megawatts from the national grid. So instead of having a new plant, they will be serviced from the national grid. The second thing is we about 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts of captive power plants, whereby we have been giving them gas on a preferential rate. So since we have additional capacity available in the system, and we have very high efficiency plants now in the system, there is absolutely no point giving those captive plants cheaper gas and basically cannibalizing the very high efficiency H class machines, which can produce the same number of units at by consuming half the fuel actually. So we are going to divert hopefully the gas from those captive plants to the very high efficiency plants. One point that Sadia mentioned, we have already proposed some amendments in NAPRA Act, whereby once we issue a determination, it should be deemed approved. If it is not, what is the right word? It's not issued by the government for the approval. So 30 days is the maximum time. Otherwise, it will be deemed notified. So that is something that the change we are bringing in our act, so as to fast track the whole process of approvals actually. Fine.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you. Can I quickly now move on to our next section, which talks about way forward, and we've been talking about how, like you said, and in like all scenarios in different companies and different industries, technology has been a real winner of COVID-19. So can I quickly introduce Anthony? Anthony Granville is a senior energy specialist at the World Bank and is leading National Transmission Modernization Project in Pakistan. So Anthony, can you talk about adoption of technology in distribution operations in order to make it more efficient, but also incentivize safety of employees? Given the current COVID situation, how can distribution companies use technology and adopt it more efficiently?
Thank you, Sahar, and thank you for inviting me and the organizers of this conference. I really appreciate engaging in these dialogues and opportunity to know a couple of you and the chairman in particular. The COVID issue is global, as you all know. This pandemic has put everybody at home, and the utilities around the world are experiencing a new shock, financially and supply-wise. So it's interesting for people to sit down and look at how to get this forward, because it's not what we're used to. But more particularly, Pakistan. Pakistan is a little complex because the high circulating debt, fiscal pressure on the government, high losses in the utilities. They have to balance a lot of these, and the innovative approach has to be up and down. The government, regulators, everybody has to be innovative. The utilities have to be innovative about it, get out of the box and see how we can get around. Because the truth about it is, going forward, in the last 20 years, we've had 5 near pandemics. We have SARS, we have H1N9, we have Zika, we have Ebola, we have MERS, and now we have this one, COVID. What that tells you is that we should have a toolkit now for this kind of thing now. It's very clear that we should prepare for this kind of pandemic anytime soon. And in the case of Pakistan, quite a lot of losses, as you said, 15%. And just last year, according to the NEPA document, only 0.7, gain in combination, reduction of losses in recovery, increase a little bit of recovery, and 0.6 in T&D losses. They were able to save 10 billion rupees. That tells you the opportunity in savings for utilities in reduction of losses. It's amazing if the utilities can now sit down and be innovative how to reduce their losses, especially the recovery, which is at the chairman just mentioned excellently, 90%. Just a little forward of it to 1%, 2%, it's going to be significant savings in this crunch time. But normally, for people to go out of the box to think innovatively, they need to have that regulatory space. And unfortunately, since the privatization in 2005 of K Electric or 2006, there hasn't been any privatization in the distribution sector. Imagine where over 43% of the IPP of the generation upstream is public, and over 80% of the customers downstream are served by generation is private, downstream 80% are public, are served by public utilities, and upstream you have over 40% generators which are private. So what that tells you are going to drop high capacity costs, pay, take or pay contracts. All this is have to be passed through. So this is the time to look at, just like Saida and the chairman said, they have to look at things like tariff rebalancing. But the key thing will be innovation. Some kind of privatization has to come in from the governance level. How do we let go these public utilities downstairs for private people to come in, to bring innovation, to bring funds? Because first, there's so much fiscal pressure on the government. I mean, you look at a circulating debt of over $10 billion, 1.6 trillion is amazing. And they are pushing out so much again, subsidizing meter structures and all that, just like what the chairman and Marina said. It's so much pressure on the government. So the only way to open the relief valve here is to let private sector to come in. And how? They have to try and push this privatization sector of the distribution guys, for private guys to come in with their funds and come in with innovation. On the downstream, the utilities have to look at what do we do now. We have to look at what do we do now. We can't wait for government to privatize before we think. So what do we do now? We have to now think of innovation. Just like what the chairman had rightly alluded to, we need technology, we need innovation to come in on board now. And we have to do serious cost-benefit analysis investment. It's not, it's not business as usual. Your demand is low, your refund, your revenue is low, your receivables from government is going to be low because they are facing other issue, other pressure. So what it means is what you normally get is not what you're going to get. But the little you have now is a serious cost-benefit analysis of how you are going to invest it. You have to direct it to where you will get maximum benefits. And that's where I think the utilities have to now think now, where do we invest our funds? Where do we put little money and get maximum benefit to be able to get increased revenue, reduce our losses? And once they begin to reduce their T&D losses, improve their recovery, then they're going to save a lot to be able to try and match, not perfectly, try and match on the immediate term, on the short term. They need to now look at how they can redirect funds to where, for instance, are you going to reduce, for instance, they have a lot of renewable curtailment at Garu cluster. Jumping area they have renewable, they have curtailment of energy there. How do we release energy, renew this cheap energy, renewable energy, bring in renewable energy to be able to get on, so that they can pass on this energy and reduce the energy from the high expensive ones. That is short term. Short term, how do we tool our maintenance team? How often do they go to check these lines, ensure that there's constant supply, and find a way to make these guys who provide the funds happy? How do you make them happy? The industrial guys, the big guys who provide the funds, how do you make them happy? I think we should concentrate on making them happy by ensuring that you have constant supply, reduce the tripping of their lines, reduce the losses of their line, reactive power, so that they're able to they don't suffer from all this at their end. So in that way, how do you handle that? Typically, you do an analysis of your lines. You look at how you can constantly provide essential and constant supply to these guys so that they feel very happy and even take more demand as their workers begin to run, to come back to office and their demand begin to increase. So those are the medium, these are short term. On the medium term, we should look at distribution automation systems, feeder automation systems, because that is where the distribution utilities are preparing for tomorrow. As I said, in the last 20 years, we just had 5 pandemic issues. This year, we'll have a pandemic one. So we have to have a toolkit. And part of that toolkit for utilities is automation. They have to look at distribution automation systems. this can reduce their losses commercially, reduce their losses technically drastically. And they have to deploy feeder automation systems. All this will come into play, and then they'll be ready for the future. And you know, things like right now, what distribution utilities are doing in Pakistan, they have overloaded feeders, they load shed because they have overloaded figures. But in the rest sense, and the MPCC guys have allocated X amount of power to you. You can't take it because you have bottlenecks there, and yet you're looking for money, and this power is going to the industrial people who will pay. So you can see the value chain there. There's a clock somewhere. So how do you deblock this? Take off this curtailment. You look at your system, you bring in energies, you improve those lines that have bottlenecks. Improve the lines, either change the sizes of the conductors. You bring automatic metering improve your AMI infrastructure, the advanced metering infrastructure in the distribution utility. That is going to it's going to reduce your commercial losses. Your lines that are causing curtailment, look at those lines and how you can change the conductors. You don't need to change the whole, build a new line. Change those conductors, high capacity conductors, because my engagement with distribution utilities, a couple of them, I found out that a lot of them are using underrated conductors. Ordinarily, they would have used higher conductors to reduce curtailment of power. So these are things they could do strategically in the medium term, such that when they do this, they reduce their losses commercially and technically, and they have more revenue, especially to those industrial guys who will need more power as time goes on, and they will steady power. So another thing which utilities around the world are going to be using in the future, and now it will be nice for the utilities in Pakistan to begin to look at it, is renewables and battery energy storage. Battery energy storage is what is typically good for this kind of period where you shift peak. During the day you store power off peak period. When it's cheaper, you store power, then you utilize it, later in the day when power is cheap, and supply those customers that need power at certain period, and they pay you good. You got to get good fund. At the same time, those feeders that you don't have money to construct down, you run out of ideas how to move these feeders, to higher capacity feeders. You could put battery energy storage at the terminal end of this feeder, store power during the off peak, and use that power and during the peak period to be able to reduce the load on the line. That reduces a lot of losses on the lines as well. So the suite of technology to use is amazing if utilities can have that space to think and innovate. So, but then a lot of this will come in from regulatory innovation. That space, because they need to loosen that hold on the distribution utilities for them to think. I mean, they are brilliant. They are brilliant ideas all over utilities are using now to begin to manage this complex, unprecedented times. I tell you, because they're having double shock. You have the supply shock and you have the demand shock. You can't have money. You can't get revenue, and your what you sell for, and a lot of people will come back. And probably people have lost their jobs. They can't even pay you your bills, but they have to have power, as Marina said. So it's a very delicate balancing here, and it needs a lot of innovation, and that will come from utilities downstream innovating, and that will be enabled if the regulatory space is being opened up for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for covering how different technological solutions can be used by the distribution sector, which I think is extremely important to be able to control all the inefficiencies as well. But there will be some regulatory space required to incentivize that. So can I quickly maybe ask Marine to touch upon one major incentive, and just one, because we're really, really short on time, Marine, of like how KE has adopted technology to provide services in this time of COVID.
Sure. So I think, Seher, I had a long list, but I'll just stick to one. It is, I think, fintech, financial technology, allowing customers to pay online through digital means, providing a variety of comfortable means to pay their bills and to access information. For example, we have a K Live app, which people are increasingly downloading. That gives them the information they need about their duplicate bills, about their energy consumption, to lodge any issues they're having. And it's things like that. When Anthony talks about innovation, these types of situations like COVID do push you to innovate. And I think we've done that for our customers a great deal. Just very shortly, I'd like to say that because this is a regulated industry, the government has a huge role to play. It's an unenviable task, obviously, but they do have to look at reducing, for example, taxes on electricity bills. I just got my bill today, and it's almost 20% of that bill is government taxes, and it can be as high as 50%. Similarly, they've got to provide incentives to discos to move towards non-carbon energy resources. They've got to provide incentives for us to move towards more energy efficient fuel mixes and regulations. At the end of the day, we can't deny it. This is a regulated sector. Therefore, it has to be balanced. It has to be sustainable regulation. And as Anthony also said, you've got to give more regulatory space. If you want innovation, if you want efficiencies, then you have to give that regulatory space. And obviously the tariff has to be reflective of the real cost of doing business. Now, I'll just end on one note, which is, you know, as we look forward, because this is an emergency situation, I do believe in the resilience of Karachi, and I believe in the resilience of Pakistan. The power sector, the energy sector is absolutely vital. Every study says that it's the driver of national growth. So you just cannot ignore it. You've got to keep it going, and you've got to keep it optimal, because it drives national growth. And Karachi drives Pakistan's growth. Karachi's growth is Pakistan's prosperity. It's our biggest city, it's our commercial hub, and we are the main contributor to Pakistan's revenues. So that's what I'd like to end on. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Marine, for keeping it short and sweet. So just a final question before we take just a few questions from the audience, and this is to you, Chairman Saab. How do we bounce back from this? So to give, like Marine said, there are definitely opportunities, and like Anthony also highlighted, that these double shots have also presented us with several opportunities. So in your point of view, how do you think this sector can bounce back in the following years?
This is to me, sir?
This is the chairman.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very interesting question. I wish I had the crystal ball with me, and I could have told you that on 27 September 2020, the corona will be over, and we'll take these measures. Unfortunately, fortunately, I have a few friends who are top doctors in the US, and I was discussing the situation with them. Unfortunately, I don't want to scare anybody, but the predictions are that a new wave of corona is going to be there starting from September this year. So I only wish and I only hope they're wrong, and we get rid of this corona. But as many people have already probably realized that I think corona is a new normal, and prediction is that it might stay for another couple of years, if not more. And my brother-in-law is also a doctor. He's also teaching in Howard Medical School as well. He is running his own 6,000 patients clinic in Boston. And he was telling me that the research is that this is the 5th mutation of this corona is, in vogue these days. So unfortunately, this seems, the corona seems to be getting stronger and stronger. So the only thing that I have to say is that we have to be stronger, and that is only possible if we all work together. We absolutely don't need to consider this situation as one company's situation, one individual situation. I think this is not, I mean, corona has done a few wonders. It has probably given us a very clear understanding that humanity is above any religion, any caste, anything. We all have to work together, and we have to fight it out. And in Pakistan, I mean, not only it is, if it was already a global village, I would say corona has turned into a global house, a global home, basically. We are all the same. I mean, this is the very first time in the history of mankind that any country, right from Africa to the most developed countries anywhere in the world, they are probably at the same page. So we all need to work together and come up with, our ingenuity. The human race has shown this resilience many times in past. And at that time, we were not blessed with the kind of technology that we are blessed today. we were not blessed with the intellect and wisdom that we are blessed today. So I have absolutely no reason to believe that we will not fight it out. So the only thing we need to do, we all have to work together, and considering it, because, you know, the last thing we want is blame game, that, you know, I should, let's say, put finger on K should have done this, K should say regulator should have done this, regulators say government should have. We all have to sit together. And in today's meeting, it was a CCOE meeting, and you know, the mood was very, very upbeat, and everybody was very, very positive. And we really worked, you know, as a team to be able to take some concerted decision, which I believe we would not have probably taken with such a haste had it not been Corona times. So Corona is also invariably fast tracking the way we are operating and the way we are working. So this human mind is definitely going to beat it, and I'm very upbeat about it. So we'll all have to work together. With regards to the industry, you know, I welcome everybody. Marine, you are most welcome. Other partners like IFC, World Bank, everybody who has access to knowledge, because knowledge is power here. So we all need your help. My doors are open. Literally, they are open, and anybody can walk in. So let's have probably a one-on-one meeting on this. Maybe have a Zoom discussion, or if you guys can fly, you're more than welcome to come and sit with us and present us with solutions. Because there's enough talk. I mean, 99% today's discussions is all about problems. I think the next session we need to have is all about solutions, because I think even my 7-year-old son knows about the problems. It's high time that we come up with the solutions, and no one entity is in a position to unfortunately come up with any viable solution. Everybody has to chip in, and everybody has to work together. That's my message.
Thank you so much, sir. And can I bother you with one of the question that was posted here? It's like a smart question. And we'll try and address just a few questions because we're really out of time. So can you briefly maybe talk about regulatory incentives that can be given to utility, or somehow utilities can be incentivized to reduce operational costs through the use of technology? So yeah, go ahead.
See, Sadia already proposed that we already have a 15% mark on the outages. We should probably, you know, be easy on that. In my opinion, being the chairman, NEBRA, I would like to make it even more stringent, because, you know, unfortunately, as Anthony rightly said, even 1% loss turns into a huge number. It's almost 12 billion rupees. So we absolutely can't afford to loosen our belt here. We, if at all, we have to tighten our belt, and we have to come up with more stringent, you know, the KPIs for our discos. So the only thing we can do is, since we have unusual circumstances, we need to have unusual measures, and we need to work closely, and everybody has to understand that in these Corona days, everybody has a civic duty to be able to at least pay for the electricity that we are providing them at their doorstep. So just understand, we set up power plants for them, we set up transmission lines for them, we set up a huge distribution system for them. Day in, day out, we provide electricity to these guys. You know, I'm talking about those who don't, those who are not in the habit of payment, you know. And the only thing that is not happening is they are not paying the bills. How on earth a government, an entity, a government or private entity can survive if you are not going to understand your civic duty? And at least all we are saying is whatever, and if everybody starts paying, I assure you, through this collective help to each other, we will be able to bring down the electricity bills. The only reason electricity bill is so high because there are so many who are not paying for whatever reasons, and those poor souls, those who are in the habit of paying, they are not only unfortunately paying for themselves, but also for the losses that are incurred by those who are not in the habit of paying. So we have to change the trend. And since we are very close to be probably vanished from this universe, I think it's high time we should realize what are our civic duties. So that's my request to everybody. Try to understand, if you are expecting a regulator to do a fabulous job, a wonderful job, it is simply not possible without your help.
Thank you, sir. And actually, on that note, talking about technology and lack of bill recovery, maybe like Pakistan can also work with other countries and think about prepayment, like issuing cards and like revising our tariff structure, doing away with slab system, and being able to create something that you can provide. You have to prepay for the power you're going to consume for the coming month. But obviously, that requires a lot of discussion and a lot of restructuring of this tariff structure as well. So I have another question that was posted, and I'd like to post that to you, Anthony. They said it was a nice presentation, and they wanted to know what policies should be related to operational point of view, such as capital investment and technical labor in Pakistan. And if you could also address carbon emission as being a big issue when we're talking about energy-related policies. So if there could be some policies to disincentivize or control how carbon emission is treated and renewables, forwarding of renewables.
Thank you, Val. Thank you, Val. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, excellent, excellent. I'll just take it. I'll just bundle the two questions, or the questions into two answers: reduction of losses and renewables. To use technology to reduce losses is it's a common thing, and though there are more and more innovative approaches to. And I engaged sometime last year. I had engagement with about six or so distribution companies in Pakistan, and it was amazing what some of them are already doing. But some too are lagging behind, and they need to, they need to coordinate to cross-fertilize and share knowledge on what this utility is doing and what this one is doing. But I'm not going to mention the names of utilities. But the key thing is something like area bond ABCs, area bundle conductors, which some utilities are using. Some are not using it, but some are actually using it to reduce their losses. Another thing, some of them were using point-to-point connections. Some of them are using that, while some are very innovative in using those point-to-point connections to reduce their losses. Some are aggressively going using AMI, advanced business infrastructures, and they showed me the kind of losses and gains, the kind of losses they've reduced and gains they've recovered. It was amazing. So if the utilities can actually think good, use conductors, because typically utilities all over the world, there's theft. If anybody tells you there's no theft, it's only in Pakistan or it's only that you have energy theft, it's not true. All over the world, even in developed world, there's still energy theft. But the thing is, they have provided the structures to reduce this theft. And one of them is using things like area bundle conductors that seals up the connection point, so you can reduce your theft. So these are things that other utilities cross-fertilize, share knowledge. Maybe the regulators could share that, opportunities between the utilities to share knowledge, a forum where they can say, what are you doing in this respect? How did you reduce your loss last year? This is what I did. This is what I'm going to do. This is how. And for now, PEPCO is so probably sitting on top most of them. So before you know, there's this resource movement and all that. So maybe the utility could bring TESCO in the PEPCO for now until such a time that PEPCO leaves the stage. But since PEPCO is still on stage now, maybe PEPCO, the utility could, the regulator could bring PEPCO and coordinate everybody to sit down and share knowledge. And these are worldwide. There's nothing new or fantastic. These are things that utilities use around the world to reduce losses. And one thing that is very important, and I noticed that they were very skeptical, they were not sure if they're going to take advanced distribution management system forward. Yes, it's cost intensive, but when you look at the cost benefit in reducing your losses and improving your recovery, that is something utilities should please, maybe the regulators should try and work with them to try and push for them to start adopting a distribution management system. That's one. We also, during the COVID, not all staff could come to the office, either because where they stay, the lockdown cut them up, they could not get transport, some they don't have cars, cannot use buses, or they cannot use transport logistics. So what that means is very few staff could come to the control rooms or O&M operations to be able to take up maintenance. So invariably, what that means is utilities should start thinking of how to use automation in that system. Sadly, automation is going to reduce workforce, and labor are going to have a little fight with the unions and all that, typically, but the key thing in the message is this is going to improve our revenues. This is going to improve our efficiency. The inefficiencies of the utilities will reduce. So if they begin to look at those opportunities, and it's for sure, those are length costs we know in utility maintenance and reducing losses. On the renewable side, the key thing, the renewable energy policy is good enough. Pakistan is running without along there. They're looking at 20% renewables by 2025, another 30% by 2030. So, but the challenge is how are they going to, because that is what is going to bring your carbon emissions down if you inject more renewables. And to inject more renewables, you need to look at look at the technology, and you need to, all the bottlenecks that will integrate renewable to your systems will have to be taken away. Regulatory challenges there. They have to be able to incentivize utilities to take up this. Maybe they can invest, or they can encourage private sector to invest in renewables. Maybe utility solar parks or wind energy, as the case may be, depending on your location and resources. So all this incentivization can improve integration of renewables. And the bottom line is the long run is going to reduce, because of course you cannot compare utility renewable cost of less than 6 cents to somewhere around between 5 and 6 to 8 from coal, for instance, 8 cents from coal. So eventually you have cheaper energy, and you're able to now reduce your losses, because you can call it captive. You can call it captive, but it's renewable, it's close, it's distribution generation. So you don't come in from the large centralized plant. So what that means is you reduce your technical losses, you reduce your distribution losses, and you improve your revenue because you're going to get cheaper power. So that is a two-way approach if you are integrating renewables in your networks. And as I said, things like battery energy storage is fantastic. That's what most utilities are using now to get off of this crisis, where you have peak loads and you use battery energy storage to shift load, to shift your peaks, and at the same time supply a load. So I'll be happy to answer any more questions, and I think that's and if you think you need more answers, I'll be happy to say something on it. Thank you.
Can I respond to what Anthony said in a very
Sure.
short words as possible? Anthony, my father was a principal in a college, and in 1984, we obtained our telephone connection in 1.5 years after submitting our application, because he got a top priority. And people brought sweets to our home that you got telephone connection in 1.5 years, because the average waiting time at that time, you must be very young at that time, was around 10 to 12 years. That was a normal waiting time. So what has changed that now average Pakistani has 2 to 5 telephone connections, which is a SIM card. Only two things. One is technology, and the second thing is competition. As we speak, we very much have this technology available in power sector as well. The only thing we are blocking, and let me repeat, blocking very deliberately, is the competition. And I have joined the power industry not as a 9-to-5 job, but as a mission to bring as much competition in this industry as possible. Being the regulator, I would like to see this market deregulated as much as we can. And one important, I made a presentation a few months back to my Prime Minister of Pakistan, and I told him exactly the same thing, that I know your vision is to lift Pakistan, to the heights we truly deserve. For that, we have to fix the economy. For that, we have to fix the industry. And the only way we can fix industry is by reducing the cost of doing business, power being the biggest chunk actually. So there are only two ways I can think of fixing power industry. One is to fix the existing, power industry by bringing efficiencies, removing inefficiencies. And the second thing is bringing the cheapest electricity possible, which is through renewable energy. So I have worked with the IFC and World Bank, and with my personal intervention while talking to the Prime Minister, we could be able to get a go-ahead for the 11 wind projects few months back. And very recently, we started in Pakistan with 17 cents per kilowatt hour few years back. lately we have issued the tariff of around 3.2 cents per kilowatt hour, and that is without comparative bidding through cost plus. So we have brought down, because of technology, thanks to technology, the cost to this level. And we have already, because we are awaiting a new RE policy in Pakistan, but since it is not coming business as usual in NAPRA, and we are dishing out as many licenses and tariff as possible to all the new RE plants. One more point that I wanted to address: we are taking a lot of initiatives, and I'm very grateful in Pakistan, very strange people actually. If we don't want to make even a needle, we will never do that. Nobody can push us do that. But if we want to, develop our own indigenous nuclear technology, we are capable of doing that. If we want to come up with most modern avionics-based GF-17 Thunder planes, we can do that, of course, with the help of our friends. So the day we decide we are going to turn around this power industry, I assure you, the only thing that needs to be changed is the mindset. Technology is very much there to help us out, but technology can't make the change unless our mind is changed. We were talking about, I think Sahar mentioned about prepaid billing. Everybody is doing it as far as telecom is concerned. Why we are not doing it in electricity? Because we are considering as our national right to embezzle or to not pay for electricity bills. The moment this mindset is going to change, I think you will see a huge change in Pakistan. And the moment we start putting this industry in profit, the prices are going to go down, and that every single citizen of Pakistan is going to benefit for that. And we are bringing technology. I assure you, I believe in participative management. Whatever we do, whatever best thing is happening in any of our discos, we are rolling it out to all the rest of the discos. I'm having very regular sessions with all the discos, may it be HSC, may it be ABC conductors, may it be replacing small connections to, let's say, 66 kV connections, or whatever it is. We are trying to bring efficiency as much as possible. We have also already split this distribution into business into retail and wire business, so that we can bring some competition in retail side. First time in the history of NAPRA, we have given a monumental decision. We have issued a license to Sindh Provincial and Grid Company actually. So what it means is we have brought competition at the transmission level, which historically has been considered as monopoly business. So very first time in Pakistan, we have a competition on the transmission side as well. So I am, being the regulatory head, I am pushing for the privatization as much as I can. And now we have a very robust CCOE, which is Cabinet Committee on Energy, headed by Asad Umar Saab, who's well-known figure in Pakistan, and we are all up for privatization. We have already given 2 discos to Privatization Commission to look for the customer and do the formal groundwork to be able to put them for privatization. Just for your information.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Sahib. This basically leads me to my last question to Zubair. Zubair, are you still here with us?
Yes, sir.
All right. So this question is directed to you, and since Chairman Sahib has already talked about competition, so the question is that we would want to ask about CBTCM, the model, the competition model, and how long it will take for Pakistan to move from centralized regulated power industry to deregulated competitive market, and what are CPPA's plans to do that? I know this is a very long and detailed question, but you can try and address it as briefly as you want, and obviously addressing this will take some time too. So I would encourage you to keep it brief.
Okay, so basically the CTBCM Chairman Saab already has very kind, he has clarified about the vision we are going to pursue, that it is ultimately the competition. So we are very happy that he is very aggressively pursuing for the competitive CTBCM, competitive trading bilateral contract market. And for that purpose, we recently have 2-3 sessions, and we will there are some approval processes which are we have to follow, and our target is around 2021. So 2021 is our target to just start the market, and it's like just beginning of competition, that it's opening of market, but how much share will be in the market, uh, it depends on what kind of payment capability, what is the consumer's capabilities. So it is going to be the transitional period which will, but still one thing is to be kept in mind, that all the business is not going to be subject to the competition, competitive bilateral trading market, that model. Although competition can be at every stage, that like for the generation addition there will be competition, for the transmission projects there will be competition, for the distribution and retail business there will be contribution. But for the bilateral contracts there will be only a portion of it which will be covered, but for that other part that will be competition, but through a regulated process. So but we are aiming a target in 2021, and will be we are very happy to have a very supportive chairman NEPRA and the government and other. So inshallah we will achieve our target.
Yeah, sir, I would like to complete this. Actually, we had 4 sessions with CPPAG getting an update on the, because we have already approved the basic design of CTBCM, and they have brought us the detailed design, which they were due to bring on in February, and we were supposed to give our final approval on that before 31st of May, before end of May, this May. But unfortunately, we found a lot of things missing in that. So we have already sent them our comments, and they are working on that. So we are targeting to give approvals before the end of June. But one thing that I asked them specifically, and I would like to share with you guys and with my audience, that initially, whatever we are doing, that is going to impact only on the 16% wholesale market, which is around 2,000 big players over 1 megawatt capacity, guys. So the 84% of Pakistan, which is at the moment regulated business, that is not going to be impacted with CTBCM in the first stage. The advanced stage of CTBCM will be, because it's not a step, it's a journey actually. So that is going to bring the power exchange in Pakistan, and again that is not going to impact the end consumer basically, but that is going to be something which is going to be future. So Zubair has rightly pointed out, we are targeting it to have it in deployed and CTBCM market, bilateral market started by the end of 2021 actually.
Thank you so much, sir. And I think this will be the end of our session. I just had a request, and like Sadia also requested, we would really request, and is for most of the data that was shared here, if that could be made publicly available for academic reasons as well, for researchers as well. So that is a request that was also posted, and that's a personal request as well. And thank you so much for joining us. Thanks a lot to all the participants. Thanks a lot to all the panelists for finding time and contributing so much to this discussion. I think this was a very interesting and captivating discussion, and I still have a lot of questions coming in, but obviously we're out of time. So thank you so much, and have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marian. Thank you, Chairman.
Bye. No worries. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.